Welcome to my Expat stories. Paddy ran a pub in Belfast for 26 years, with his wife Eileen beside him. When Eileen died, he sold the pub because the pub without her in it was a thing he couldn't explain to anyone who hadn't stood in it. He went to Boracay because it was as far from Belfast as he could get on a single booking. He met a young woman called Angel at a beach bar, and he knew from the first week exactly what it was. He paid for it anyway. £44,000 over 14 months. If you've ever done something you understood completely and couldn't stop, like and subscribe. Because Paddy isn't here to tell you he was fooled. Here's Paddy. My name's Paddy. 63. Belfast. I ran a pub for 26 years. Me and my wife Eileen. Not a gastropub, not a sports bar. Just a pub. The kind that has the same people in the same seats on a Friday evening. And you know their drinks before they sit down. And when something happens in the news, there's a conversation about it that matters, because these are people who know each other. That kind of pub. Eileen ran the kitchen. I ran the bar. Between us, we ran everything else. She died. I'm not going to dress it up with details because the details aren't the point, and because I've found that the more you describe it, the further away the actual thing gets. She died and I sold the pub within 8 months because I walked in one morning and stood behind that bar and looked at the kitchen hatch and understood in a very clear and final way that I was not going to be able to do this. Not without her the other side of the hatch. I wasn't suicidal. I want to be clear about that. I was just empty in a way that had a physical weight to it. Like someone had opened a valve and drained something essential and left the structure standing but hollow. I could function. I ate, I slept, badly. I went to the supermarket and stood in aisles too long. I had a daughter in Derry who rang every Sunday, and I could hear in her voice that she was watching me carefully, and I tried to sound like a man who was managing, which I was technically, just not well. A customer of mine mentioned Boracay. He'd been twice, said something about it that stuck with me. He said it had no history in it for him, no memories attached to any street or building or smell, pure neutral ground. I thought about that for 3 weeks and then I booked it. I landed on Boracay on a Tuesday and walked out of the small airport into heat that hit me like a wall, dense and wet and smelling of vegetation and sea, and the diesel from the tricycles lined up outside. And for the first time in 8 months I felt something shift. Not better, not healed, just different. The weight was still there, but it had moved slightly. Redistributed, the way a heavy bag feels different when you put it on the other shoulder. Still heavy, just different heavy. White beach in the early morning before the tourists were up was a thing I hadn't expected. The sand white and unmarked. The water a colour that changed every 20 minutes as the light changed. Green, then blue, then a kind of turquoise that had no name I knew. The air smelled of salt and something floral, from the trees behind the beachfront, and the only sounds were the water and the birds and the distant put-put of a pump boat engine, somewhere offshore. I sat in it every morning for the first week, just sat in it, and let it be what it was. It was the closest to peace I'd been since Eileen died. I should have been careful with that. Should have understood that a man in that condition, hollow, unmoored, suddenly and unexpectedly touched by something, is not in a reliable state for making decisions. I knew that. I'm a publican. I've watched people in that condition make decisions across my bar for 26 years. I knew exactly what I was. Didn't help. Angel worked the bar at a place on the beachfront. Open air, thatched roof, the sand right up to the bar stools, the sea 30 feet away. She was 26, small and loud in a way that should have been the opposite of what I needed and wasn't. And the laugh was real. You can't fake a laugh like that across a bar, I'd know. A big, unguarded sound that she made no attempt to manage. She brought me a San Miguel, without being asked on the second evening. I hadn't ordered one. She said, "You look like a San Miguel man." She was right. I asked how she knew. She said, "You hold the stool like someone who's spent time on the other side of a bar." I told her I'd run a pub. She asked where. I said Belfast. She said she'd never met anyone from Belfast. I said most people hadn't, and she laughed that laugh and moved down the bar to someone else, and I sat there with the cold bottle in my hand and the sea sound behind me and thought, careful, Paddy. Careful now. I was not careful. The thing about Angel, and I need you to understand this was real, not imagined, not the delusion of a lonely man. The thing about Angel was that she was genuinely good company. Not good company the way a professional is good company, all performance and mirror work. Good company the way a real person is. She was curious. asked questions and listened to the answers. Had opinions she'd argue for, knew Boracay down to the last corner, and talked about it with the proprietary love of someone who'd chosen it rather than just ended up there. She'd grown up in Leyte, come to Boracay at 21 for work, sent money home to her mother and 2 younger brothers every month, which she mentioned not as a bid for sympathy, but as a logistical fact, the way you'd mention a standing order. She was saving for something. She was vague about what, which I noticed but didn't press. She'd had a relationship with a foreign man before, a German. It had ended badly, she didn't go into it, but the shape of what she didn't say was familiar. The shape of someone who'd been used and had quietly filed it and moved on. I knew what I was doing. I want to say that again because it's the important thing. I was 63 years old, and I'd run a bar for 26 years, and I could read a situation. I knew this young woman was lovely and real, and also operating within a dynamic that involved my wallet as much as my company. I knew that. I ordered another San Miguel and watched the sun go down into the sea and made the decision anyway, because the weight had shifted again, the particular, a hollow weight of grief. And I hadn't felt it shift in 8 months, and I was not ready to feel it settle back. That's the honest version. Not romance, not delusion. Just a man in pain making a transaction and telling himself a more comfortable story about it until the comfortable story was the only one he could find. The trouble with comfortable stories is how long they hold. The money started the way it always starts, not with a request, with a situation. 3 weeks in, Angel mentioned her mother's roof. Not to me directly, she was telling another bar worker about it, in Tagalog, and then switched to English when she realised I was there, slightly embarrassed, the way you're embarrassed when someone overhears a private difficulty. The roof had been damaged in a storm. Her mother was managing, but the wet season was coming, and managing wasn't going to be enough. She said it the way she said everything practical, flat, logistical, a problem to be solved when the money existed to solve it. No performance of distress. No eyes held on mine to gauge the effect. That was what got me every time. The lack of performance. I said how much would sort it. She told me. I gave it to her the next evening in an envelope, cash, and told her to get it fixed before the rains. She looked at the envelope for a moment and then looked at me and said, "You didn't have to do that, Paddy." I said, "I know." She used it, sent me a photo of the repaired roof 2 weeks later without being asked. A small, neat job, fresh timber, her mother standing in front of it with a cautious smile. I looked at that photo for a long time. The cautious smile. A woman who'd learned not to show too much pleasure in case things were taken back. I knew what I was looking at. I'd been a publican. I knew the face. I extended the trip. Another 3 weeks, then another 2. I had the money from the pub sale sitting in an account in Belfast doing nothing for anyone, and a daughter in Derry who rang on Sundays, and a flat I'd rented after selling the house that I had no particular feeling about in either direction. There was nothing pulling me back, nothing that felt more real than the bar at the end of the beach and Angel's laugh and the particular quality of early morning on White Beach when the sand was unmarked and the light was doing something to the water that I couldn't name. I stopped trying to name it, just sat in it each morning with a coffee from the place 2 doors down, thick and sweet, the cup warm in both hands, the smell of it mixing with salt air and whatever was frying somewhere behind me. Let it be what it was. Angel and I fell into a shape. Not a romance in the way films mean it. She was 26 and I was 63, and we were both too clear-eyed for that particular story, but something real within the shape of what it actually was. She'd finish her shift, and we'd sit at the end of the bar after it emptied, the sea dark beyond the lights of the beach, the sound of it constant underneath everything, and she'd talk and I'd listen. She was a good talker, had a Belfast quality to her stories, the comic timing, the willingness to be the Egypt in her own anecdotes. I told her that once and she didn't know what an Egypt was, and I explained and she laughed and said, "Yes, that's exactly what I am," and laughed again. I missed Eileen, in those moments specifically, the sitting at the end of the bar moments, the talking without going anywhere moments. Eileen had been that. 26 years of it, the specific comfort of someone whose company you didn't have to perform for. I missed her in the way you miss a limb, not dramatically, just as a constant background fact, the ghost of something that should be there and isn't. Angel wasn't Eileen, I knew that. Wasn't trying to make her Eileen, but she filled a particular silence that I hadn't been able to fill since the kitchen hatch went dark, and I was grateful for it in a way that had nothing to do with romance and everything to do with survival. The money kept moving. Her brother needed school fees, a specific amount, a deadline. She showed me the letter from the school on her phone. I didn't examine it closely. I gave her the money. 2 weeks later, her motorbike needed repair. The one she used to get to work when the weather was bad. She'd been walking the wet road in the dark. I sorted it. A month after that, she needed to renew something. A license or a permit. The Philippine bureaucracy of it vague to me, the amount modest. I gave it without asking her to explain further. I want to be honest about the architecture of this. None of the requests were large. None came rapidly enough to feel like pressure. They were spaced and modest and always came with context that was real enough. The roof photo, the school letter, the wet road in the dark. She wasn't greedy. She was methodical in the way that people who have never had enough are methodical. Careful, measured, taking what was available without taking so much that it stopped being available. I recognised the methodology. I'd extended credit in my pub for 26 years. I knew the difference between someone milking a situation and someone navigating it. Angel was navigating. The situation was me. We both understood that. Neither of us said it out loud. There were good weeks, I need to say that honestly. Weeks where the financial thing was simply not present, and it was just two people in a good place in the world spending time together. She took me to a part of Boracay the tourists didn't reach. A fishing village on the far side of the island. The boats pulled up on the sand. The smell of salt and old rope and fish drying in the heat. Kids playing in the shallows. The whole thing so far from the white beach tourist strip, it felt like a different island. She knew people there, they fed us something. Grilled, wrapped in leaves. I never found out what it was. And it tasted of the sea and smoke. And I sat on an upturned hull and watched the light change on the water and thought, Eileen would have loved this. That happens sometimes. A moment so full it made the absence louder rather than quieter. I'd stopped fighting it by then, just let it arrive and sit there until it passed. Angel saw it once, the thing passing across my face. She didn't ask what it was, she just waited until it had passed and then handed me another piece of whatever we were eating, and said something funny about the man across from us who was arguing with a goat. And I laughed, and she moved on. That was a kind thing. Done with the instinct of someone who understood grief without needing it explained. I went home twice during the 14 months, short trips, a week each. My daughter. Some things with the solicitor, and the accounts. The flat in Belfast that still smelled faintly of the pub, of spilled beer and wood smoke, and the particular warm human smell of a room that has had people in it consistently for decades. I'd stand in it and feel the Hannigan's smell on the air, and something in my chest would tighten until I couldn't breathe properly, and I'd open a window and stand at it until it passed. I rang Angel both times from Belfast, late evening my time, early morning hers. She'd answer from her room, voice still thick with sleep, and I'd hear the sound of the fan and the distant birds, and the quality of the air in that room, even down the phone line, the specific warmth of it, and I'd feel the tightness in my chest ease slightly. She wasn't Eileen. I knew that. I just needed the sound of somewhere that didn't have Eileen's absence in every corner. I went back each time. Of course I did. The last visit started the same as the others. Boracay Airport, the wall of heat, the tricycles outside. White Beach in the morning. Angel at the bar in the evening. The same laugh. San Miguel without being asked. But something was different, and I couldn't immediately locate it. A slightly reduced quality to her attention. Not cold. Nothing like cold. Just thinner. The way a signal thins over distance, still there, just carrying less. She was seeing someone. I found that out from another bar worker, a woman called Blessy, who said it without thinking. The way you mention something you assume is common knowledge. A local lad. Been a few months. Blessy said it and moved on, and I stood there at the bar with my beer and kept my face right. I didn't say anything to Angel about it. She didn't mention it. We sat at the end of the bar that evening, in the same shape as always. The sea dark and constant beyond the lights, and she told me a story about an argument in the market that was genuinely funny, and I laughed at the right places, and the money I'd been giving her kept being the money I'd been giving her, and she kept accepting it in the same practical way, and neither of us named what had changed, and what had always been true simultaneously. And then one morning, late in that last visit, a week before I was due to fly, I was repacking my bag, pulling things out to find something at the bottom, and my hand closed around something small and light that I didn't recognise by feel. I pulled it out. A holy medal. Tiny silver on a thin chain. St. Bridget. Eileen's. She'd worn it every day of our married life and taken it off the chain at night and put it on the bedside table. And I had found it after she died, and I hadn't known what to do with it. So I'd put it in a small dish in the bedroom, and it had sat there for 8 months, and I had looked at it every night before I slept, and I could not explain how it had come to be in my bag. I sat on the edge of the bed in the Boracay guest house, with the ceiling fan turning overhead, and the sound of the beach coming through the window, and the medal in my palm, and I didn't move for a long time. She'd been in the bag the whole time. I'd brought her here, and I hadn't known. 14 months I'd been on this island, in this bar, in this shape that wasn't grief and wasn't love and wasn't anything I could name. And she'd been in my bag, while I was doing what I was doing, and paying for what I was paying for, and telling myself the story that made it bearable. I sat there with the medal in my hand and the fan turning, and the sea outside, and I thought about Eileen behind the kitchen hatch, and the sound of her in the morning, the specific sound of her in a kitchen, the clatter in the radio and her voice singing something slightly wrong. And I thought about what she would make of this, of me, of this island and this bar, and this young woman, and this 14 months of managed distance from the thing I couldn't face. She would have been kind about it. That was the worst part. She was always kind about things I did wrong. She'd have been kind about this too, and I could hear exactly how she'd have said it, and I sat with that until the fan, and the sea, and the medal in my palm all blurred together into something I couldn't see through. I put the medal in my shirt pocket, close to me, wore it there for the last week on the island. Didn't tell Angel, didn't tell anyone. Just carried it and let it be what it was. Eileen present in the only way she could be present now, small and silver and warm from my body heat by the end of each day. The last week had a different quality to it. Not worse, not better, just seen more clearly. The way your eyes adjust to a room when the main light goes on and you understand the actual dimensions of it for the first time. I sat at the bar in the evenings, and Angel brought the San Miguel and told her stories and laughed her laugh, and I was glad of her company in the same way I'd always been glad of it. The warmth of her was real. I want to say that again because it matters. The warmth was real. What it couldn't do was the only thing I'd been asking it to do, which wasn't fair on either of us, and which we'd both understood from the start without ever saying it. I gave her an envelope the night before I left. More than usual. She looked at it and then looked at me with a directness that was the most honest moment we'd had in 14 months. She said, "You're not coming back, are you?" Not a question. A statement. The instinct of a woman who had learned to read the moment a thing was ending before it was said. I said, "I don't think so." No. She nodded, put the envelope in her apron pocket, and then she said something I wasn't expecting. She said, "I hope you're all right, Paddy. I mean that. I genuinely hope you are all right." And the thing is, I believed her. I still believe her. Whatever else was true about those 14 months, that sentence was true. She meant it. She's a person, not a function, and she had genuine feeling for me within the shape of what we were. And the shape of what we were had a financial dimension she wasn't going to apologise for, and I wasn't going to ask her to. We were square, or as square as two people can be when the transaction was never fully named. I said, "You too, Angel. Take care of yourself." She moved down the bar to someone else. The sea kept doing what it does. I finished the beer and left. The flight home was long, and I slept through most of it in the boneless way you sleep when something has finally resolved into a shape you can carry. Not comfortable, just settled. The medal in my shirt pocket the whole time, the chain coiled underneath it. Belfast in the morning. The specific grey of it, the specific weight of the air, the smell of the city coming off the wet streets as the taxi came in from the airport. A smell I knew before I could think about it. Something mineral and cold and familiar in the way that only the place you've been longest can be familiar. It sat in my chest differently to how Boracay had sat in my chest. Heavier, more permanent. The weight you don't put down because it's not a weight, it's just you. The flat, the hallway, the faint pub smell still in the walls after all this time. I stood in it for a moment. Let it be what it was. I went to the bedroom and put the medal back in the small dish on the bedside table where it had always been, straightened the chain, stood there looking at it. £44,000. I've worked out the honest version of what that bought. It bought 14 months of not being in this flat alone. It bought White Beach in the early morning and the coffee with both hands. It bought Angel's laugh and the fishing village and the grilled thing wrapped in leaves that tasted of smoke and the sea. It bought 2 trips home where I could ring a number and hear the sound of somewhere warm coming down the line and feel the tightness in my chest, ease enough to breathe. It didn't buy what I went there looking for. There was no price on that. I knew that before I booked the flight, and I went anyway, because knowing a thing and being able to act on it are different countries, and I didn't have the passport for the second one. Not then. My daughter came down from Derry the following weekend. We sat at the kitchen table with tea, and she didn't ask questions, which is the right thing. She's always known when to ask and when to sit. At some point she put her hand over mine on the table and left it there. We didn't say anything for a while. I thought about Eileen's voice singing something slightly wrong. Every song she ever sang, slightly off key, completely committed to it. Absolutely unbothered by being slightly wrong. Because she was happy. And happy people don't monitor themselves, they just sing. I haven't been back to Boracay. I haven't been anywhere. I'm in the flat in Belfast, the medal in the dish beside the bed. I walk, I cook, badly. I ring my daughter on Sundays now, rather than waiting for her to ring me, which is a small change that feels significant. I don't regret Boracay. I want to be clear about that. I don't regret a mourning of it. I regret what I went there running from. Or rather, I regret that there was something to run from, which isn't the same thing. Grief isn't a choice. What you do with it might be, but standing in a supermarket aisle, unable to choose between two identical tins because she always chose, you don't logic your way out of that. You just find somewhere to put it for a while, until you can bear to hold it properly. Angel was somewhere to put it. I don't think she'd mind me saying that if she ever heard it. I think she'd probably say, "Yes, Paddy, I know. I knew from the start what you needed. That's the truth of it." She knew. I knew. We put different things into it and we both knew what the other was putting in. And we were decent to each other within it. And then it ended the way things end when they've run their course, without drama, in a bar on a beach, the sea doing what it always does. The medal is back in the dish. I look at it every night before I sleep. She'd have been kind about all of it. That's the thing I keep coming back to, turning over in the dark of the Belfast flat. She'd have been kind about Boracay and Angel, and the £44,000, and the 14 months of managed distance from something I couldn't face. She'd have made a cup of tea and sat across the table and been kind about it. She was like that. She was always like that. I miss her in the way you miss a limb. Constantly. Without drama, just always. This is my expat stories. And sometimes a man doesn't lose his money to a scam. He spends it on surviving something that was never going to get cheaper. And the only person who could have told him whether it was worth it was already gone.